Okay, thanks everyone for joining Build and Implement Your API Analytics Strategy. I'm John Rethens. I work in Apigee's strategy group with our enterprise customers all over the world, and it's great to have you here today. And I'm joined by my esteemed colleague.
Hi everyone, my name is Arvind Jain, and I'm in the product management team, focusing on analytics as well as a few other initiatives within the company.
And for those of you who are longtime webcast viewers, you know that Apigee has a large library of material, both on YouTube and on SlideShare, as well as the Apigee website. And as always, if you have questions after this webinar or you're looking to implement your analytics program in your organization and have follow-on questions after this, you can always go to community.apigee.com, where there's a whole bunch of Apigeeks ready to answer all your questions. So without further ado, what do you say we get started today?
Let's do it.
Awesome. So what we're going to be talking about is kind of two things. First, we're going to talk a little bit about strategy and the business implications of analytics to put the whole topic of analytics and APIs in the proper context. And then what we're going to do is we're going to talk about the technology, and Arvind will walk through some of the capabilities of the Apigee platform and show how you can use the platform to support some of these strategy ideas. So one of the first things we want to talk about today is just the idea that API analytics is more than operational. So a lot of the customers we work with are very capable and apt at running different kinds of platforms in their businesses, and they use analytical capabilities for care and feeding. But what we really want to focus on here is how thinking about APIs and analytics with APIs is really a kind of a different ballgame than maybe what you might be used to in your organization. So we want to share some of those ideas. And one of the first ones is that API analytics can really drive a lot of business value. And part of this is fundamentally that APIs are products, not projects.
Yeah, so John, what do you mean API analytics drives business value?
Well, glad you asked, Arvind. Let's talk about the context in which Apigee thinks about kind of the world today, and then we'll drive into it in some more detail. So most of you who are joining are likely familiar with the idea of two-speed IT, two-speed enterprise, maybe you call it bimodal. There's a lot of different terminology out there. But basically, the world as we see it is made up of kind of these two IT drivers, right? So you've got kind of the classic world of enterprise IT, where you have CRMs, ERPs, SOA integrations, databases, data warehouses, data lakes, tied together with ESBs or other types of kind of heavyweight integration. And then you've got a world that needs to be supported that's made up of your customers, employees, and partners who are using any number of mobile devices, watches, connected cars, connected homes, etc. And really one of the key things here is that the pace of change between these two things is very different. There's an impedance mismatch. So what we typically see with enterprises is that the IT organization is designed to move really over a matter of years with annual planning cycles and multi-year projects. And the demands of the customers and their partners and their employees are in days or weeks. And so this mismatch creates the need for something to mediate that impedance mismatch, and that is where the API layer comes in. And so that API layer does a number of different things, right? There's security involved, there's scale, there's management of all these APIs, there's obviously the integration of the connections and the connected world, IoT world, and there's analytics around all of this. And if you just think about it from the perspective of where enterprise IT has been in the past, where we are today, while you can certainly do point-to-point integrations as needed, the proliferation and the speed with which these integrations need to be done is such that it really isn't efficient and you can't keep up with what needs to be going on. And furthermore, you can't analyze across all these things.
Exactly, because you have a lot of systems in the back end that have their own interfaces and that have their own private APIs, building applications against those systems becomes difficult unless you have a common layer that abstracts that interaction from the back end to all these various devices that you're trying to access.
That's right, exactly. And so, when we look at the world and when Apigee thinks about product development and has for many years, it was very clear that analytics is a key part of this conversation. It's one of the main reasons why you want a platform, so that you have a single point of view and a single point of control where you can manage this ecosystem of devices and partners and customers that are outside your enterprise.
Yes.
Right? So that's why analytics ties into is such an important topic when you're thinking about digital transformation, your digital business, and obviously your API program. The digital value chain implies kind of a fresh look at analytics. And what do we mean by this? So those of you who are already Apigee customers, you're familiar with our concept of the digital value chain. For those of you who are new to Apigee, this is really a core idea of how we think about the world. So I just want to talk a little bit about what the digital value chain is and why APIs are such an important, why API analytics are such an important part of this. So starting over here with the user, the whole purpose of an API program and a digital program is to serve your customers or your partners or your employees, whoever is using the data from your backend systems, and generate a really phenomenal digital experience for them. And that obviously, it kind of goes without saying, that's because everybody is interacting with your enterprise from apps on their phones, on their iPads, even on their computers, or through their cars, or through their connected devices. Mm-hmm. And so it's really important that the enterprise shift to focus on creating these great digital user experiences, which are created, these connected experiences are created on apps which are built by developers. Mm-hmm. The developers are using, by and large, modern JSON REST APIs, and those APIs are built by API teams. And some of you who are on the call obviously are members of those API teams. And those API teams are connected to the back end. And so it's about creating this seamless flow of data back and forth here.
Yep. So John, are you familiar with the Heisenberg uncertainty principle?
I am, but some of our listeners might not be.
Okay. Well, so at its basic, what it means is that if you want to measure something, you disturb the behavior of that thing that you're measuring. So if you recall the previous slide where we showed all these point-to-point connections between the various backend systems and the various front-end devices, if you had to analyze the interaction between all of those different users and the various systems by putting your own probes or putting your own monitors against the flows of data, that would tremendously slow down that user experience and affect the end result of that experience for those applications. And so what you want is a way to gather that information without affecting that performance or that flow of data between all those various systems. And that's where the API management platform comes in, where you have the ability to extract that information, that analytics information, in a uniform way without adding to the overhead of measuring that information.
That's right. Right, exactly. So in a sense, but everyone is using a lot of tools on their connected experiences. They're using tools to do analysis on their back-end systems. But when you're trying to connect these two systems together and get this seamless flow of data, if you use a lot of third-party devices or monitoring systems to do that, then you're going to actually degrade the user experience, which defeats the purpose. Right. So that's one of the reasons why it's really important to, when you're implementing your API platform, to think about how can you use the native analytics system that is already a part of it.
Exactly.
Great. We're going to step back for just a quick moment and talk about KPIs, because when you're thinking about your digital business strategy, one of the key components of putting together the right strategy is KPIs, and that naturally lends itself into analytics, right? Because analytics is all about measuring and analyzing data, but what are you measuring and analyzing for from a business perspective? So if at the top of this call we talked about how it's not just about operational metrics, it's about business metrics, KPIs are really where business metrics are at. So Apigee has something called the Apigee Institute that does its own research. And in a study of more than 1,300 executives of companies with $500 million more in revenue a year, it was found that establishing a framework to connect digital investments more directly to enterprise KPIs was the single most important area of strategic alignment for predicting high digital capabilities. So when we mean high digital capabilities, we mean the ability of an enterprise to use apps, APIs, and data to drive business. So more than anything, knowing what you're trying to accomplish when you set out on your digital journey is really important. And we see a couple of kind of patterns, both an anti-pattern and a success pattern in companies that we work with. And Apigee has the privilege of working really closely with our enterprise customers globally and across many different verticals. And this plays out the same in everywhere that we're at. So the anti-pattern is for an API team or an API program to have a set of KPIs that is generated kind of in isolation from what the rest of the enterprise is trying to accomplish. So a common factor of this, and some of you who are already on your API journey may be grappling with this yourselves, is okay. Well, we're going to do an API program, so therefore, the number of APIs we have, that's what we're going after. We want purely the number of APIs. That's how we're going to measure our success. Well, APIs are just enablers. So you can have a lot of enablers that aren't enabling any value or any great user experience, and it's not really doing anything for your business. And we've seen programs that just only focus on number of APIs to sometimes run into problems because they're building a lot of APIs, and after a year or two, the business is saying, well, where's the value I'm getting from this?
So it's sort of like measuring how many servers are in my data center.
Exactly. And it's not tied to anything in reality. Yeah. Another common one is API traffic, right? So API traffic is very important. Obviously means someone is using the API. But what if that API traffic isn't tied to an app that's really doing something useful for the business, right? Maybe it's tied to something that's internal that it has a lot of usage but isn't driving real revenue. Correct. So oftentimes what we'll see when organizations are struggling to find the right KPI alignment for the API program, they're starting from the bottom up. They're starting with the APIs. Then there's like, well, we created this app, and now our customers can do something, but that app isn't really connected to really the main revenue generators, right? So a better success pattern is kind of a top-down approach. So let's talk a little bit about how you would put a top-down approach together. We have customers that are working on getting a certain percentage of all interactions with the company through digital. That means transactions in terms of buying and selling things. It also means interactions in terms of customer support and just finding information about products and doing price comparisons or shopping. All of that is something that's being measured. So we have one very large enterprise customer that's saying they want to have 80% of all interactions with that company done through digital channels in the next 4 years. We have another customer that has set an enterprise goal for driving 75% of its revenue through digital channels. And this is a company that didn't have digital channels 5 years ago. 75% of its revenue through digital channels in the next year or two. So these are very aggressive targets, and really what it is leading from the top to drive a shift in the enterprise behavior. And so when you understand what those enterprise goals are, in your enterprise they may be different. And a good place to look is you can look in your 10K. You can look at what your executives are talking about. What are the major goals and initiatives for the enterprise for the year, and then looking what programs there are, and then supporting those programs with the apps and the APIs that will drive real business value in the future.
Exactly. So in that kind of a pattern, not only do you want to look at the number of interactions that your consumers or your users are having with you, but the nature of that interaction. What's the information that's flowing through that interaction, and you want to be able to extract that, measure that, and assimilate that in these kinds of analyses that you're doing. Exactly.
And when you're looking at things, and we'll talk about this in more detail as we go through what the product allows you to do, you want to be able to say, okay, if we have an enterprise goal of X, Y, or Z, or if we want to have a certain amount of revenue driven through the company, who are the developers that are going to help us drive that revenue? How well are we serving those developers? Where are they? How hard or easy is it for them to onboard? So let's take a look at the next slide, and I think it digs into this in a little bit of detail. Again, at the enterprise level, you're looking for revenue, growth, efficiency, customer satisfaction, and then you're thinking, how are your apps, your developers, and your APIs specifically helping support those KPIs? So maybe you could talk a little bit about how you can use analytics for each of these.
Exactly. So if we start at the very fundamental level of APIs, of course you care about the performance of your APIs, because at the end of the day, all the interactions that you're facilitating for your end users are flowing through these APIs. So you want them to be performing well with the lowest latency and the minimal number of errors, because any degradation in those metrics affects the experience of your users. And if their experience degrades to a point where they walk away from you, then you're losing business.
Right, exactly.
So,
And because really in the digital world, your brand is the digital experience.
Yeah.
And regardless of what you're selling or what the enterprise is providing to the marketplace, whether that be in the medical space, in the insurance space, in the banking space, in the retail space, in any of those spaces and more, you're only getting the benefit of that digital experience.
Exactly. And so to facilitate that digital experience, you want to have developers, you want to enable developers to build out applications that utilize those APIs. And so the kinds of things that you want to measure are how many developers are engaging with you, how many developers are using your APIs, what are the types of products and applications those developers are building, so that if they're building applications that are driving interactions with your business in the right way, then you want to promote them and you want to encourage them. But if you have developers who are building applications that are resulting in poor experiences, high failures, then you want to work with those developers to educate them and have them use your APIs in the right way so that they can be the stewards of your brand. Because at the end of the day, if the developers are sending users to you and those users and experiences not very good, then it's affecting your business.
That's
not just that developer.
Exactly, and and in an extreme case, you may have to cut those developers off or take some measure to rectify the situation. The other thing to keep in mind is, so why is it so important to do this as a platform as opposed to, you could say, well, I can set up any API I want and I can put analytics on it, right? But think again to the number of devices, the number of experiences, the number of customers you have to support, and therefore developers that you have to support. You want to be able to see all of those things in one place, and you want to be able to act on everything in one place. So you don't end up with kind of a jungle vine of jungle vines of different point-to-point solutions.
Yes, exactly.
Right.
And then finally, going to the left side of this picture, all the apps are the channels through which your users are interacting with you. So where are the users coming from? What's the reach that you have across locations, across geographies, across the types of apps, across channels, whether it's mobile, whether it's devices, whether it's web. So you want to understand the types of interactions your users are having so that you can make sure that you address their needs uniquely and deliver the kind of information that is relevant to that type of interaction channel.
That's right, and you want to be also able to see all of this at the edge of your enterprise, right? So obviously all these enterprise organizations that we work with, and all of you on the phone, you all have BI solutions, right? You all have BI teams, right? And really what we're talking about is kind of a fundamentally different shift, because kind of a classic BI model is that all the data comes in, then it gets analyzed, and then a report gets sent out maybe every month or every week, or maybe you get a dashboard on a few things. But what we're talking about is near real-time data that's at the edge of your enterprise, where you can see exactly what's happening throughout your digital channels as it's occurring, right? And you can take that action, and you can take action on that quickly, because a big part of this is these are all products. Your apps are products, your APIs are products, and you need to be able to iterate them quickly as software products. And to do that, you've got to be able to have kind of real-time view of what's going on across all the channels and the dimensions that Arvind was talking about.
Yep, exactly. All right, so why don't we take a look at some of the kinds of information that we are able to present.
For those of you tracking our agenda, we're getting into the technology side
of it. Yeah. All right. So coming back to this digital value chain, at each of the layers, at the app layer, at the developer tier, as well as the API tier, there are different types of information that you care about. So if we start off with the API analytics, you care about traffic patterns, performance, the location from which those APIs are being called, any anomalies. So if there are errors that go up, unpredictably, or latencies go up, you want to be able to measure that and detect that. And so there are a variety of different metrics that you can track and measure to understand the behavior of those APIs. Then, shifting out to developers who are engaging with you and using those APIs, you understand who are the top developers and how much engagement do they have, how many apps have they built, and how much traffic are those apps driving into your system, so that you can provide them additional capabilities, or you can engage with them more effectively, so that allow them to build out better applications, as well as look at offering monetization programs so that you can not only make your APIs available, but at the same time start creating a business around those APIs as well.
That's right, and not, maybe to belabor it a little bit in terms of the importance of developers to the business. So again, if digital businesses are driven by experiences that are built by developers, then that means that developers are really the kingmakers of digital business and digital transformation. And so cultivating your developers, whether they be internal developers, whether they be partners that you work with and make it easy for your partners to do innovative things with you, or if they're third-party developers that you're hiring to bring in to do particular jobs for you, or if you have an open API program, all those developers are part of your ecosystem. So, managing that ecosystem, because the key thing is you can't control all your developers, right? You're managing them. You can only manage them if you have data, right? And so you can only find out who's being successful and invest more, who's having trouble, as we discussed earlier, and perhaps invest less or do retraining or find an alternate path with them. That's how you do it, is with really great developer analytics, and APIs as your primary software product is the place where you want to be watching this.
Yep, exactly. Okay. And then finally, when it comes to understanding apps and their behaviors, understanding the performance of those apps. So if you're building mobile apps, then you can incorporate an SDK within the mobile app itself and start measuring app performance, crashes, which types of devices and which type of networks those apps are calling into your APIs. And then translate that to the performance of those APIs and understand the distribution of where those apps are being called from and the types of devices and platforms they're running, so that at the end of the day, the information that you're serving from your APIs has to be well suited for delivering the right experience to those users of those different apps on those channels.
Yep.
So let's now move into some of the various types of information that our analytics platform enables. So we'll start off with the operational type information, the type of information that you would measure at the API level. And it is important for the operations teams to have a good sense of how much traffic is being sent to your APIs, not only in sum across all the APIs, but then breaking it down by individual API as well. And so the app analytics platform allows you to do that. So not only can you measure the total traffic, but then also break it down by the number of calls that were successful and the number of calls that failed because of some sort of an error somewhere along that path. And another key metric that's important to measure is the total latency, the response time that it took for those calls that are coming into your system to be returned back.
Oh, but Arvind, I mean, we're just talking about really boring operational analytics, and this is supposed to be about business. Why are we mixing this in here?
Well, at the end of the day, you care about the experience of your end user. And that experience is affected by errors as well as latencies. So let me give you an example of a customer who uses analytics. They've got a large developer program who build apps to integrate the services of this company into those applications.
Right.
And
this is a digital native.
And this is a digital native.
Right.
And so one of the key success factors for this company is delivering the best user experience for their service without failures in logins or poor experiences.
Right.
So they use the platform to measure the performance and the errors that the apps from the various developers generate against their system. So
and in that way, they're able to better manage your developer ecosystem and find out who's putting out the best quality product.
Exactly. So they're able to identify those apps and the developers who haven't built good performing and apps that deliver a good experience, so that if ones that are generating a lot of errors, they can reach out to them and work with them to improve those apps and improve the end user experience.
Right. Fantastic.
So one of the other things that's important in measuring this experience is also measuring the behavior of your backend systems. So all the various APIs that you build out are going to touch some backend system, because at the end of the day, you want to deliver some information that sits in your databases or in your applications. And so measuring how much data are you sending, how many calls are you sending to the various backend systems, but then also what's the response time? Are those systems behaving well, or are they getting overloaded? Because traditionally these systems weren't designed to service the orders of magnitude larger number of calls that are originating from all your mobile devices.
Right. So if you're an API product manager, or you're playing that role in an enterprise today, understanding your back-end systems, this is like your supply chain, right? So if you're thinking of kind of a classic hardware business, right, and you're a product manager, you've got to know what's going on on your buy side, or I'm sorry, on your sell side, but also on your buy side, on your supply chain side. So this is kind of like supply chain for APIs.
These are your suppliers for your APIs, exactly.
Right.
And so if your suppliers are getting bottlenecked and they're not being able to service your demand effectively, then you want to go back to them and say, hey, increase your capacity. Or if the backend system has failed, you want to go back to them and have them bring it back up, because at the end of the day, it's affecting everyone, that company's business overall.
Great.
And then, complementing that, you have the ability to measure the total latency and the response times of your APIs, not at every tier. Aggregate across, from the time the call originates and hits your API tier, and what the total response is, as well as breaking it down by the amount of time it took within the API processing layer and the amount of time that your backend systems took, so that you can identify where the issues may be, and then find the right ways to address them.
That's right, because again, customers have a choice. And if they're using your digital products and those products are slower and they're getting frustrated, you need to be able to identify where the issue is, so that you can create a really great digital experience for them.
Exactly. And then finally, getting a view of all the errors that are being generated. So the goal of every API developer is to not have any errors in the interactions that you have with your users. But we all know that there are going to be errors at various different parts of that value chain. So the user from the app could be generating an error, for example, sending an incorrect password. So that's an error generated by the user. But then the API could also have returned invalid response, because let's say you've set up a threshold on total number of calls and put a rate limit on the APIs, because your backend systems are only able to handle a certain amount of traffic. Then let's say you incur a spike in traffic, and once you hit that rate limit, all the calls that are coming in beyond that rate limit start getting rejected. So that's another error that you want to measure, so that in the future you can address that by increasing your rate limit, and then also working with your backend systems to increase the capacity, so that you don't have that bottleneck and lose customers and deliver poor experiences to those users.
Right. And again, all of this is really important data as a manager of a digital business, to understand what's going on in terms of across all your channels, being able to look in one place at one platform and see across all your channels, all your developers, all your apps, all your APIs, what's going on very kind of quickly from one space.
Exactly. So now let's shift towards developers and understanding who's engaging with you and how they're using your apps, your APIs. And so one of the reports that we provide is for you to get a quick view into all the developers that are signed up with your API platform, with your program, to build applications against your APIs. And so you can measure the total number of developers, as well as how many apps the developers have built out, how much traffic those apps are generating, how much traffic those developers in aggregate are responsible for, and then at the end of the day, look at that across various tiers, across various dimensions, so that you have the ability to analyze that information overall across that entire program, but then also at an individual developer level.
Right. And again, as a digital business, your ecosystem of developers are really the folks that are going to carry you forward and help you from this transition from a non-digital to a digital company. And so having the tools to be able to really clearly understand who's in your funnel, how engaged they are, whether or not they're having any difficulty, how easy or hard it is for them to onboard to your APIs, all that information is paramount to your ability to be a really well-functioning digital enterprise.
Yep. So once you have apps, then one of the important things that you want to measure is where the users are coming from. Where is that traffic coming from? So that if the majority of your traffic, let's say, is originating from North America, then you want to make sure that the infrastructure that you've employed to run your APIs is concentrated in North America. But if you have traffic originating from across the world, then you want to distribute your API infrastructure across multiple regions so that the call paths from each of those users is minimized, and they don't have to make a call that comes into an API that's deployed in one part of the world and then returning the results back to that other.
Because again, that would degrade the user's experience, and again, that would degrade their view of your brand, right? And so another thing that's really important is, as product managers, when you're thinking about your APIs, obviously, as Arvind stated, you're going to have in mind where you think things are being used. And it's really important to be able to see whether or not the market is actually playing out the way that you thought it was. And if it isn't, maybe you need to make some adjustments.
Exactly. So having a consolidated view into all the traffic that flows through your API platform becomes important. And if you were to try to do that individually, then you may lose out on this big picture. Finally, one of the other things that's important is understanding the types of devices and the platforms and channels from where your users are accessing your APIs. And so getting a good view of the various OS platforms, the types of hardware platforms, devices is important because you have the ability to shape the type of information that is sent to these different channels. And so your API developer can choose to send richer information to a web application and encourage that web application to utilize that more effectively versus a mobile application where you want to reduce the amount of data through that payload, and service those users and service those application developers differently. So having this view allows you to engage with your consumers, with the consumers of those APIs and the developers more effectively.
Yeah, and again, this all goes back to that idea, right, that really your developers are customers of your API. And so you're going to want to create experiences for those developers that are unique to the needs that they have, right? And so Apigee is a really powerful platform that enables you to do that without having to do, one-off integrations for every kind of developer. You can really use the power of the platform to create the best developer experiences for the digital experiences that you want to have at the users, whether they be customers, partners, or employees at the end of the day.
Yep, exactly. Okay. So we have a lot of these reports that are provided to you out of the box, but there are going to be a lot of times when you want to create a custom view of reports against the data that's being captured from the API platform. We collect over 500 variables and data points from each interaction that flows through our system. And so within the analytics platform, within Edge, we allow you to create your own custom reports that allow that you can select any of the 20 metrics that we provide and slice them across any of the 100 out-of-the-box dimensions. So for example, if you wanted to measure the traffic for a particular app that belonged to a specific developer and look at where that traffic is coming from, you can create a custom report and visually within the system generate a chart and track that over time.
Right.
So it gives product managers and API teams a very powerful mechanism to analyze this information without relying on third-party tools to generate these types of reports.
Right, because again, because of Heisenberg,
Yep.
if you are using lots of third-party tools, you're actually degrading the user experience that you're trying to improve. So using something that's built into the stream of data between your apps and your backend, like an API platform, is really a great way to go, which is why we, obviously Apigee has spent all this time building this in.
Yep, exactly. There are going to be many times when you use your own dashboards. You have your own portals where you want to report and present the charts. So being an API company, we provide you an API into the analytics platform so that you can call into these APIs and generate the queries and take that data and publish them into your own dashboards.
So we publish our own APIs?
Exactly.
So as Arvind pointed out, Apigee practices what we preach, and this is an additional way where you can work with. If you're a product, and we've seen this in the past, if you're an API product manager, you can use our API dashboards, as you've seen examples here today, and you can also export things out to your BI teams if you have a system set up where you want them to be able to use this data as well.
Exactly. So just issue a standard REST command into our platform, and the result set can be pushed into any other BI tool or any other reporting tool. So finally, once you have built your APIs and deployed them, you have the ability to measure the traffic that is flowing through your system. But one of the other things that's important is for you to understand how your users are experiencing your APIs. And so the way to do that is to either have someone from your company go to all the various parts of the world and call into your APIs or use those apps and see what the response time and the experience looks like.
Which may be fun for them to do, but not the most efficient use of time or money.
Exactly. And so what we do is we provide a tool called API Health, which is an external monitoring tool, which basically works by sending calls into your APIs from various parts of the world. So you can measure the response time and the response codes and the availability of those APIs from various points around the world. So it is the closest thing that you can get to understanding how your users are experiencing those APIs that they're calling into.
Right, and again, because all of this is for naught if you're having a poor user experience. The entire purpose of all of the work that we're doing here at Apigee, that you're doing on your teams, that digital organizations, developers, and others are doing, is to create great digital experiences. So if the experiences aren't good, you're really not meeting the goal.
Exactly.
And so finally, just to bring it all back home here, because we want to make sure that we give some time for questions. And so here at the end of the hour, we're going to make sure we're giving some time for questions. Just to wrap it up, this idea of the digital value chain, I've been doing this for 2 years now, and it never fails to amaze me how often you can just come back to this and really check your understanding of what it is your enterprise is doing, how successful it's being by really thinking about this digital value chain. And so, analytics complete the digital value chain because it's really the measure of how well all of this infrastructure, from your backends to your API teams, your APIs, your developers, and the connected experiences, are serving the ultimate goal, which is a great user experience. And so, again, doing that in a one-off manner, you can do it, but you're going to actually degrade the user's experience. And doing it through a platform approach and really getting very sophisticated in how you use the analytic tools in the Apigee platform enables you to manage your digital business for growth. Again, thinking from what are the enterprise's goals for digital and working your way backwards from that user on the left-hand side all the way back to the back ends is really a great way to use analytics to grow your digital business.
Yep. Well said.
So thanks everyone for joining. We're about 45 minutes into the conversation, and we'd love to get some questions from you. So if you have questions, go ahead and type them in, and we'll take a look and work with you on it.
Yep. So while we wait for questions, I wanted to just spend a quick 1 minute telling you about the I Love APIs conference that is coming up in October. And it is designed for API teams and executives and developers to get a good practitioner's view of how other companies have built out their API platforms and their programs and the experiences that they've had along that journey. So if you sign up using the code that's listed on the screen, you'll get a 30% discount off the current price of the conference.
Fantastic. And I would just add, the conference is really not, its focus is not kind of a rah-rah sales conference like other companies you may be aware of. It's really a chance for all of the practitioners, as Arvind said, that work on all sides of the API program, on the business, on the technical, on the development side, IT side, everyone to come together and share experiences both through the panels and speakers where we really highlight as many customers as we can and what they're doing, but also in the downtimes and the networking times to be able to talk with each other and talk about API analytics and any other number of topics that might be on your mind. So really encourage everybody who's involved with APIs to come to I Love APIs in October. We'd love to have you there. So let's take a look at what kinds of questions we've got. And so I see one question here that talks about, Arvind, we've got a data lake. If we've got this data lake that's pulling all this data together, why would I need to bother using an API platform?
Yeah, so a data lake typically collects data from a variety of different systems, and so you would use a data lake to do offline queries and run periodic reports against that data, which not only may come from your APIs, but from other backend systems, your ERP systems, and your inventory management, and other applications that generate data. So if you are looking at extracting data out of the API platform and combining that with other data that you have from the enterprise, then certainly you can use the APIs that we provide to pull the data out and merge that into your data lake and run consolidated reports. Because at the end of the day, the analytics platform that we provide in the Apigee Edge platform is designed for giving you a view into the API traffic. It's not a full comprehensive BI tool. So we're not replacing existing BI tools or existing data warehouses. We complement them. But if you need to utilize the data generated by your APIs, you can certainly do that and combine that with the data lake.
Great. So we've got another question here that says, you talked about enterprise KPIs, API, or app and API metrics, but what about some of the program? Because we have that level program in there. So that's actually really good. I mean, if you're thinking about your enterprise goals, right, you've got to break those down into initiatives and programs. And so initiatives and programs that you could get are really around, think about, for instance, let's say you have a partner program, right? So measuring the time it takes and the amount of money it takes to integrate or to have a partner begin using your services, and also maybe what the abandonment rate for partners is. Because a lot of programs that we talk about, partners will get frustrated with the integration process and projects will fail. Right? So if your goal is to drive more revenue through your enterprise from digital, and one of your key programs is getting more partners integrated tightly with you, then you want to measure the improvement for onboarding partners to your platform by use of the API program. So that would be one measure, one KPI. And then you would think about what are the different APIs that are needed for that and get into some of the metrics that we talked about, that Arvind talked about when we were going through the support from the product.
Okay, great. So let me read off another question. So does your platform offer the ability to isolate API response time issues at either the network, the far backend system compute resources, or the API platform's compute resources? So yes, when you look at the latency analysis reports, you can look at a breakdown of the amount of time that the API call took within the API tier, both on the inbound as well as the outbound, and then the amount of time that it took to get a response from the backend system. And that's important because by distinguishing the amount of time that it takes on the inbound versus the outbound within the API tier, you can measure the effect of the policies and the different callouts that you may be doing within the API tier, or So if you have a lot of policies that are being evaluated within the API tier, then they will, of course, chew up some cycles and take some time before that call gets sent to the backend system. And so having that view allows you to study that. And at the end of the day, if you think that a policy is degrading that response time significantly, then you have that information to decide whether that amount of degradation is critical to the end experience that you are delivering to your users.
Right. And it's a fundamental tool of being able to manage APIs as a product.
Yep, exactly.
Excellent. Okay.
Okay.
So I think that's all the questions we had today, and we were able to provide the information we were hoping to, and we hope you enjoyed it. We thank you very much for joining. We'd love to have you with us. Remember that you can find all of this material on YouTube, on our website, and on SlideShare. And so if you have any further questions, you can always follow up with anybody at Apigee, myself included, Arvin included, and we hope to see you at the conference on October 12th. Have a great day.